Ask you, Tom, about the challenges facing labor in Alberta.
Well, Alberta is kind of a unique environment. We've benefited, arguably, from having very strong economic development for the last 15 years. But at the same time, it's an environment that's quite hostile to labor. We, as a union movement, spent a lot of time complaining about the province's labor laws, which are the worst in Canada, purely and simply the worst in Canada. And we sometimes aren't good enough at explaining what the consequences of that are. Alberta has the lowest unionization rate of any province or jurisdiction in Canada. And when you talk to people about that, to academics, there are various explanations put forward, including a sort of cowboy culture in Alberta and a sort of politics of rugged individualism. But in plain and simple fact, it is much harder to organize and unionize in the province of Alberta because the laws are carefully tailored and shaped to make it easy for employers to retaliate and punish workers who try to exercise their charter right to unionize and bargain collectively. So that if you try to do an organizing drive in Alberta, the frontline workers, the people on the job who are trying to unionize, are putting their jobs on the line. Because basically there's very little in this province that prevents an employer from if they act cleverly, from getting rid of them, and that has resulted in a unionization rate here of about 22 to 24%, as opposed to about 30% in the rest of the country. So that's an ongoing challenge for us. It's very hard to unionize in this province, and it's very hard to keep the union going in the face of unremitting hostility from the government and from some employers. There have been exceptions. There have been some very notable successes in the province. Lakeside Packers in southern Alberta was a wonderful story of a union and a workforce that was very poorly paid, worked under appalling conditions, was composed of new immigrants to a large extent, a workforce that involved people from Newfoundland, Somalia, the Philippines, all over the world. And in southeastern Alberta, which is a fairly conservative part of a conservative province, facing an employer that was viciously anti-union and engaging in a very long, very difficult fight, including a very difficult strike, and they won. And it's one of the great success stories in this province. And the union in question, United Food and Commercial Workers Local 401, is to be commended because they've really taken a leadership role in this kind of stuff. But boy, it's hard.
I understand that Alberta is a stronghold of the Christian Labourers Association of Canada, or CLAC. Tell me a bit about CLAC and its impact on the Alberta labour movement.
The Christian Labour Association of Canada is the union of choice for employers. It's a union that has been very successful in organizing in, for example, the construction industry, especially in the pipeline industry and in Fort McMurray in the oil sands, because they tend to be welcomed by employers. So as opposed to the kind of experience I was just talking about, where unions that try to organize in the province face very, very serious challenges, and workers who want to organize face very serious threats, the Christian Labour Association tends to be welcomed by employers, in some cases to have the, if not the active assistance, then at least the compliance of employers. And it's enabled them to grow very, very quickly. And what it means is that unions that have a long and honorable tradition of organizing and fighting tend to get squeezed out. And that's been a real problem in construction, in the oil sands, and in some other areas, so some retail areas. There is, for example, one of the largest grocery chains in Alberta is organized by CLAC. It's a voluntary certification, meaning the employer and the union agreed in advance without ever having to go through an organizing process and vote a vote. It's a province-wide certification, so all across the province, people who work for Save On Foods are members of the Christian Labour Association of Canada. And we would argue that the CLAC does not do a real great job of pushing hard to assert the rights of their members. And they're fairly straightforward and open about saying, well, we don't believe in confrontation with employers. And that's fair enough. The question is, do they do what has to be done to represent their members effectively? And we would argue that in a lot of cases they don't. We would also argue that the other unions in the province don't run around seeking confrontations with employers. On the contrary, their job is done most easily if you can get along, but that a union that shies away from confronting an employer and shies away from taking the actions that are necessary to defend and assert the rights of their members is not doing a good job.
A couple of weeks ago in Ottawa, I talked to Salima Valiani, who's an immigration advocate and researcher, and she was telling me the temporary foreign workers have become, the class of temporary foreign workers has become the predominant form of immigration in Canada. And I understand that that's quite a concern in Alberta. Can you tell me about temporary foreign workers and the experiences they're having here?
Yeah, it's been a real hot issue in Alberta, partly because of our really strong economy until the last year or so. And it first really surfaced, I think, it was 2004. I went down to a consultation or a briefing session held by the provincial government and Statistics Canada that talked a lot about the shortage of skilled workers and our need to have more skilled workers in order to foster economic growth in the province. And it was quite interesting because it was framed as a question of not having enough skilled workers to do the construction that was needed in the province. Just as a sort of footnote towards the end of the all-day session, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Labour said, and of course the hospitality industry. And what of course the hospitality industry is, hotels, restaurants, the lowest paid jobs. So essentially what happened was that large numbers of temporary foreign workers were brought in, mostly in construction and the hospitality industry, so both the high sort of end jobs and the lower ones. But in every case, what the advantage for the government and for the employers was that essentially temporary foreign workers had no rights. I mean, they had the absolute bare minimum of legal rights. They lacked even the right to stay in the country. Their presence in Canada was tied directly to their employment. If they lost their jobs, a lot of the time, they were simply shipped back to the country they came from the next day. Even in cases where that didn't happen, it was a constant threat. So you had a workforce that was not unionized in most cases. It was not. It didn't enjoy a lot of the legal rights that people had in Canada, and to the extent that they had rights, they didn't have any way to enforce those rights. So you had people brought in living in construction camps up in Fort McMurray. If they were being denied the simple basic employment standards kinds of rights that every Albertan has, they had no way to, no one to talk to and no way to get those rights enforced. So
you set up an advocacy center, right?
Yes, the Alberta Federation of Labour went to our affiliates, and we got contributions from them, and we hired and established the first temporary foreign worker advocate in Alberta. It was an individual who did about 75 hours work a week for a very long period of time, for about a year. The demand was we were shocked by the demand, and we were shocked by some of the horror stories we heard. After about a year, and after a lot of lobbying from the Federation of Labour, the provincial government opened up an office which was supposed to provide services to temporary foreign workers. It certainly didn't provide the kind of services a lot of them need, which is some kind of assertion of rights in the face of employers who brought them here precisely to exploit them. But to the extent that there is now some kind of government service available to temporary foreign workers, it happened in large part because of our efforts.